Overnight,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Yes, it's what we do here on a Thursday morning, and I'm so glad we do. I know you are as well from the feedback we get, for which I say thank you. Leith Van Onselen, who is co-founder of macrobusiness.com.au. Check it out. It's where we get our economic information every single day. It's all tinged with the thing we like to call common sense. Mr. Van Onselen, hope you're well.
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Luke. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad at all, mate, not too bad. Gee, there's some things to talk about today. Look, something you sent me late, which I know you'll publish a lot about as we make our way through today, and this is about Australian housing construction. Now, we've had government and others say, you know, we've got to get the skills, we've got to get the people here, we've got to build houses. We've really got to go hard and build houses. Is there anything that's happened in recent times that would indicate to you, mate, there were any chance of going hard and building enough houses to make enough places for these million-plus new arrivals that the government is hell-bent on bringing here?
No, mate, it's getting worse, unfortunately. So every week I seem to get on here and say it keeps getting worse, but unfortunately it is. So on Wednesday, the Australian Bureau of Statistics released its quarterly housing construction data. So basically it's got three data sets it does. The monthly dwelling approvals has been falling. That's, down at near decade low. And then yesterday it released both its sort of dwelling starts and dwelling completions data, and both of them were absolute shockers. So basically, look, the long and short of it is that only 170,000 dwellings, just under that actually, 169,500 dwellings were added to the nation's housing stock last financial year. So it's the 2022-23 financial year. And that's, of course, against a population increase of 626,000. So we basically added 70,000 less than what Albo's housing target is. So that requires 240,000 a year, and we're doing less than 170 last financial year. So we're way below that. But what makes it even worse, Luke, is that dwelling commencements, so that's the stuff that's basically in the pipeline or currently being built rather than those that have been built, that fell to a decade low of just 172,000. Now that sounds like a bit more than what was built, but it's actually less because some of those dwelling commencements are going to be demolitions and rebuilds. So basically, if I knock down my house to build a new one, that gets counted as a dwelling start, even though you're not actually adding to supply. So you can probably knock that figure down by about 8% to get the true figure. So basically, what the long and short is that housing construction is falling. It's not rising; it's falling, and it's at a level that last year was 70,000 less than Albo's target. And what makes this really galling is that there's actually 240,000 homes in the pipeline to be built, and that figure hasn't really budged for about the last 2 years, pretty much since the home builder stimulus. So what that basically tells you is that we don't have enough builders, we don't have enough materials, and there's all these homes that are waiting to be built, but they're not getting built. That just tells you there's all these supply bottlenecks. And the reason why it matters is obviously the rental vacancy rate, as we talked about last week, is at 1% nationally, the lowest in living history, basically, in any of our lifetimes. And with the population growing by over 600,000 people a year and not building nearly enough homes, just points to one thing: the rental crisis is going to keep getting worse, and rents are going to keep rising at a strong rate. You're going to have more financial stress, more people being forced to live in group housing, and of course more homelessness. So the data just keeps getting worse, which tells you that if you can't fix the supply side, and obviously you can't do it, it's going to take forever. Even if you could do it, the only solution is to temper demand through, obviously cutting immigration, slowing the flow of people. Exactly what we talked about last week. But the data just keeps getting worse.
And they've got no appetite. You never hear them mention that. When I say they, I mean the government. In fact, they get up in question time often and talk about this new housing assistance package, which finally got through, I don't know, a month or two back. And I think that has the admirable goal of 30,000 low-cost dwellings, 30,000 over 5 years. That doesn't touch the sides. And you know what else, mate? It also has to take people out of the construction sector to build them. So they're doing that. And this, begun but not completed pile over here is being impacted by a lack of workers. Madness.
That's right, mate. Look, that 6,000 a year they're going to build is basically wiped out in less than a week of just new arrivals. So the whole thing's ridiculous. It just doesn't make sense. None of it adds up. And as we talked about last week, that 3-day housing conference, I think last week we talked about, it was in play. They had this 3-day housing conference in Brisbane. They held last week. 1,200 delegates were there from all over the policy makers, housing groups, industry, all that sort of stuff. And the recommendations were a laugh. They were just basically, we need to build a bit more social housing, regulate Airbnbs, and maybe go for some more prefab homes. There wasn't one mention of immigration in there.
Yeah.
So what are we doing? It's just the whole thing is just an absolute farce.
It is. Now, unemployment. I think earlier this week you wrote, Australia, we have an unemployment problem. Now, again, you watch the coverage of politics around the place and, it's got a 3 in front of it, how good is this? It might go up a little bit. What do you mean that we have an unemployment problem, mate?
Yeah, so basically the Australian Bureau of Statistics later on today will release the labour force data for September, and Australia's unemployment rate has officially been stuck at 3.7% for about 6 months, which is pretty good figure if you look at it. But the problem with it is every other measure other than the ABS is basically getting worse. So like Roy Morgan's got a alternative unemployment survey that it does. And unemployment there is basically risen by 1.5% over the past year. Those two surveys traditionally track each other very closely. And what Roy Morgan's basically seen is that Australia's created 50,000 jobs in the year to September, but the labour force grew by 412,000, and that's obviously because of this immigration thing. And on top of that, there's another great survey. It's actually my favourite one, would you believe, from Seek. So Seek does job ads and also do the number of applications per job ad, and that figure is, to me, is almost the gold standard because it's basically a measure of supply and demand. So it's basically the number of applications, which has been rising very quickly because of the extreme immigration we've got, against the number of job ads, which is job demand. And that figure is basically the number of applications per job ad is running now way above where it was pre-pandemic, which basically tells you that the labour supply is growing super quickly and much faster than, and at the same time as demand for workers is falling, which makes sense because we've got these high interest rates. And again, that indicator has historically tracked very closely with the ABS's unemployment figure. And if you put them side by side, it's a leading indicator, usually runs about three to 6 months early. If you put them side by side, it's basically saying that the official unemployment rate as measured by the ABS is going to shoot up quite aggressively. And an excellent independent economist named Tarek Brooker has done some work, and basically Australia at the moment needs to create 38,000 jobs a month just to keep the unemployment rate stable because we've got such high population growth. Yeah. And he did a thought experiment. He said, well, if the labour force keeps growing at 38,000 per month and our jobs growth merely goes back to what it was pre-pandemic, which was 22,000 a month, Australia's unemployment rate's going to rise to 5.2% by the end of next year from 3.7%. And that's so we'll still be creating jobs like at the same rate as we did pre-pandemic. Problem is we're adding so many people through migration that we don't have the jobs to soak up all these people, which means the unemployment rates are inevitably going to rise. So it's not been picked up yet in the official figures, but all these other figures, whether it's Seek or Roy Morgan and there's other ones as well, are all showing that the labour market's weakening because of this absolute labour supply flood through high immigration, which of course is also wrecking the rental market.
Goodness me. Now, what about, quickly before we go, the RBA concerning inflation and where it might go? This follows the release of their minutes. What do you read into this? There's already some reporting saying, rates are going to move again. What's your take on all of this?
Yeah, so I think a couple of weeks ago I was saying that all the indications were the RBA wasn't going to hike rates, but then it threw a spanner in the works with its minutes it released on Tuesday, where it basically signalled two things that it's worried about. Surprise, surprise, again, gets down to this immigration thing. Dave and I, and that's my business partner, Macro Business, call it Albo-inflation. So basically the RBA mentioned that residential rents are growing at a fast rate, and that's adding inflationary pressure to the market. Surprise, surprise, that's what happens when your population grows by 600,000, rents go up. And the other thing it said it's worried about is rising house prices, because what that basically means, although doesn't directly feed into inflation, whenever house prices rise, typically households spend more because through what's called the wealth effect. So they feel wealthier, so they spend more. So it's also worried that that's going to have to raise interest rates to counteract that. And both of those things, obviously, like the rebound in the housing market in prices and also rents, has been caused by this immigration thing. So, we've basically got a triple whammy at the moment where it's obviously demand through population growth and immigration is running way ahead of supply, whether it's infrastructure or housing. So that's creating this massive housing shortages. That's pushing up house prices and rents, which is adding inflationary pressure, which means the RBA is going to hike more. And then it's also increasing unemployment because we don't have enough jobs to soak up all the extra people. So it's sort of like immigration's almost become the everything problem for Australia. It's creating all these pressure points on jobs, which also means wages. There's going to be downward pressure on wages once the unemployment rate rises. It's pushing up inflation, and it's creating this obviously rental crisis and housing crisis as well, because we can't build enough to house all the people that are coming in. So it's just all the federal government needs to do, and I think I've said it before, I call it burnout economy. The federal government's basically pumping demand through immigration, while the RBA is trying to slow demand with its foot on the brake, with obviously through its interest rate rises. So we've got the federal government and the Reserve Bank working at cross purposes when they should be working together. And the reason why they're working at cross purposes is because the federal government is growing the population through a rate that we have never seen before, creating all these problems across the economy and for individuals. It's absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, the triple Albo. Macrobusiness.com.au. Leith Van Onselen, always great to talk to you, mate. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you next week.
Cheers, Luke. Anytime.